When I first saw photos of this thing over on Show Z, I remember thinking, that's weird. I guess they're making knockoff blockies now. Because let's be real. When looking at Brave Troops Toys BTT-01 Bumblebee here, it does kind of have a slightly blockies look to the proportions. So imagine my surprise when I scrolled down on the listing page and saw a vehicle mode. Yeah, this thing actually transforms. I'm not kidding. Say what you will about Rise of the Beasts, I personally enjoyed it for what it was, but I feel like it's not controversial to say Bee's design in that movie was pretty cool. It sort of melds the more angular style and the Camaro mode of Bayverse with the easier to parse definition and less busy aesthetics from Bumblebee. He still has the roundy gauntlets and hands, and those oddly recognizable feet, only now with the Camaro chest instead of a VW Bug. But there are a lot of neat subtle changes that blend the two styles even more. Like how the shoulder pads have a similar structure to the Bumblebee movie, but now there are more straight edges to the outer frames rather than them being curved. The same goes for the calf design. It's very similar, but it's just not as smooth and rounded as it was in the Bumblebee movie. I also really like how the doors split to look even more like wings. I can't remember if he did this in any of the Bayverse movies and it just never made it into any of the toys, or if I forgot, or if I'm imagining things, but I like the look here. It livens up the silhouette a bit more and changes the shape of the doors just enough to make it feel like they're doing more than just sitting on his back. We'll get to my thoughts on that noggin in a bit, but for now, we need to talk about these proportions. In short, I really like how they're simultaneously kind of heroically slim and a little cartoonish. I think that's what's giving me the blockies vibes. Or, to be more specific, it's the combination of bigger boots and the narrower chest that really does it. Particularly the chest. I love the way it pinches in to narrow the overall silhouette while still being very recognizable as a car hood. And it pinches in a lot, like way more than I'm used to seeing on these style Bumblebee figures. All the luscious detail doesn't hurt either. The way the deco bounces back and forth between the yellow and silver, or yellow and black, or all three, gives this a sort of premium feel. Taking the time to really look at it now, I'm not sure there's anything missing. I do have this unsightly blob on the right forearm, which kinda stinks, but aside from that, I've got nothing. Even from the back. They even added copper detailing in the spine area. They didn't need to do that, but they did. As for that head, I'm still not a fan of this face design, even if I vastly prefer it to the pre-Bumblebee live-action flicks. But more than anything, I just don't think the big baby pacifier look works with the more angular body. Kinda clashes a little. It might have blended better if they adapted the design in a similar way to the shoulders and shins, by, say, building off the Bumblebee movie look with some sharpened angles, but this just comes off like Charlie's softy of a BFF is trying to look edgy. The sculpt is nice for what it is, and the paint and detailing is great. I just don't like the overall design of the face. Though when you slap on the included battle mask, he looks... yeah, this'll do nicely. Because yes, you do get a battle mask. It just slides around the face, like so, and it uses a little magnet to stay in place, I think. And it just looks so much better this way. It's that recognizable, somewhat insect-like mask from the Bumblebee movie, and I've loved that design since I first saw it. Except here the eyes, or lenses or whatever, are just a solid color. I like that it's a shiny black, which stands out on the slightly more matte yellow, but it would have been cool if there was some tiny honeycomb-shaped segmenting going on in there. I'm probably being unreasonable here, and he does still look amazing with the mask on either way, but I wants what I wants. So the articulation on this guy is pretty good, but is limited in a few places. The head's on a ball joint, which is actually pretty expressive. You get some pretty decent tilt and some reasonable up and down, as well as the full 360 on the movement. The arms are a little bit weird because of how everything works. So you've got a friction joint up here and then a ratchet joint here. So I've got the friction joints angled up more, but you can, if you want, bring them down, which is, I think, more accurate, or where they're supposed to go, but I just prefer having them up a little bit. You got those friction joints, which you can use for up and down motion. You've got ratcheted joints for up and down, and then you can also hinge out the shoulder pads, which these pieces back here, these are part of the transformation, and they're a little bit tricky to work around, but you can work them. They're on this like dual rotational joint, like this metal armature here, and it's you just kind of have to work with them. But you can get those out of the way and you can bring the arm out, so it can go out to 90, and if you use that friction joint, it can go up even further. The forward and backward rotation is a little bit tricky because of this thing back here. You'll notice he's got wheels back here. The wheels are on their own little armatures, so you can swing them back to get them out of the way if you want more range of motion. Because when they're up against the back like this, these pieces do get in the way, so you can only bring them back so far. But you can go out pretty reasonably, I guess. Well, okay, I was doing this with the arms up like this, so you can get forward motion, and then that goes at a weird angle, but that's because I have the way it is. But with the wheel out of the way, the arms can pretty much do a full 360. You just have to, account for the backpack and stuff. You've got bicep rotation. The bicep rotation is also a little bit weird. Like, it doesn't want to go in all the way. It tends to want to go out more. What's happening is this little circular bit that's part of the piece that this is hinged on, that's getting in the way of the outward bicep rotations. So you can only, or inward bicep rotations, you can only rotate it inward a little bit. You can rotate out that far and then it wants to stop. So you can't go all the way around on the biceps, which that is a bit of a bummer. The elbows, though, those are legitimately a disappointment. It's because they only bend this far. They can't even bend to 90. They can bend backwards a little bit, but they can't bend to 90 because of the way his forearm is designed. There's this little detail right here that's bumping into the bicep, and I feel like they could have easily not sculpted that in so that you could get a little bit more out of the bicep. But actually, wait, is there a double joint there? There is a double joint. I didn't even realize that. Okay, so there's a double joint in the bicep, but even if you use that double joint, that just gets it a tiny bit further. So yeah, I guess it's good that there's slightly more of a range to the elbow, but it's still just not what I would call enough. Like that piece gets in the way, and it really didn't need to. But hey, double jointed elbows. Didn't realize that. That's cool. You do not get a forearm swivel, which is a problem. If you had a forearm swivel, you could rotate it so that piece got around. If you had a forearm swivel, you could rotate it so that piece got around the bicep, but not there. Can't do it. The hands, though, they are on, I think, like a ball joint. So you get... Oh, no, it's not a ball joint. It's a swivel and a hinge. So you've got rotation that can go all the way around, and then some in and outward motion there. It'd help if I actually showed this. So rotation and some in and out. The thumb is on a singular ball joint, so it can rotate and swing in. And the fingers, they are pinned together at the knuckle. So it's one piece, but then the individual fingertips are pinned in separate pieces. So you can flare them out a little bit. So you can get a little expressive with the fingers. They still look kind of lanky and long, but it's not too terrible, I don't think. You do also get a waist rotation, and it's, you get that waist rotation. It can't really go all the way around, I don't think. Let me double check here. You've got these hip skirts that are on double hinges, so you can actually hinge these out and down. So let's see if we get the hip skirts out of the way. Does that give you more waist rotation? Yes. Okay, so you can go around more with the hip skirts out of the way, but you're still... This piece is still clashing with the actual hip assembly, so you're not going to get full 360 on the waist. But still, that's not a bad rotation. And with the hip skirts out of the way, you can bring the legs out to about here, so not quite 90. And then they can go forward to 90, back to... I want to say about here, because this yellow piece is pushing into this yellow piece. I don't want to push it any further than that, but that's about there. You do get a thigh rotation, which it rotates enough. It's like it's not going to go all the way around, but I feel like for, everything going on and, not looking like he's breaking limbs, I think that's fine. And then for the knee, it bends to pretty much 90. Come on, let's go a little further. No, just stops there. Okay, so it does not quite go to 90. But it does bend, and you get this little mechanism that moves up the knee pad, because I guess this is just a required thing for movie Bumblebee figures now. But, it's fine. And this doesn't affect the transformation at all. You don't even do anything with this for the transformation, which is nice. And the feet are actually surprisingly well ranged. You get ankle tilt that can go pretty reasonably. You've got some forward and backward motion. I'll show you from the side here. You got some forward and backward motion, and the toe can actually go down and up a little bit, which honestly I kind of would prefer it if the toe didn't move at all, but it is what it is. It even actually has a ball joint, so because of the joint being a ball joint, it can rotate. So you've got a pretty decent amount of foot posability. More than anything, it's the biceps, the elbows, and the knees, I think, that are like the biggest limiting factors of this guy's posability. But in terms of just general transforming figures, it's not bad. It's just maybe not as good as we've come to expect. Perhaps unreasonably, I'd argue, for some of these things. Like, he's definitely not a 3-0 Bumblebee, but he's not trying to be a 3-0 Bumblebee. Seeing as Rise of the Beast Bumblebee was armed to the teeth, or mandibles, it only makes sense that this figure comes with a pair of knives and a pair of blasters. The knives are both simple, singular pieces of unpainted plastic, but seeing as these are supposed to just be the blades, and they just peg into the wrists, I don't think they really needed any paint. And all you do to attach them is there's just a little tab here that goes into there are 3 slots on the blade. It goes into the one that's the furthest back. And you just tab that in, and it even lines up a little bit with the rest of the gauntlets. That's how you tab the knives in. They look cool when they're in place, and I'm glad that they're both the same shape, rather than the straight and rounded edge accessories that a lot of Bumblebee movie bees end up with. I like the symmetricalness when it comes to the wrist blades. The guns also look good, but unlike the knives, they have multiple colors. It's still a fairly simple color layout when you really look at it, but it creates a cool layered effect between the black and yellow and this tiny bit of silver at the back here. Attaching these is also pretty simple. You just ball up the fist, tuck in the thumb, and then you tab the end here into the underside of the wrist, right in here. It just plugs in like that. It integrates really well, hides the real hand nicely, and you can even peg the knives onto the wrists at the same time. It's a bit extreme to have B with a pair of blasters and knives, but I feel like based on what we saw of him in Rise of the Beasts, this does track. It probably hasn't come across super well up to this point, but BTT-01 is actually pretty big. Significantly taller than a Modern Deluxe or Voyager, to be sure. A little shorter than a Modern Leader, though. Of course, this is also a lot beefier. Like, this thing feels significantly heavier than Magnus. Compared to other Bumblebees, well, it's noticeably taller than the MPM, or at least a version of the MPM, but it's also a lot smaller than Beast Mode Bumblebee. Granted, Beast Mode B is supposed to be a huge gimmick toy, but they're both meant to be the Rise of the Beast design, which is why I'm doing this comparison. Regrettably, I don't have that Cyber-era Bumblebee anymore for a side-by-side. Wish I did. I may grab another one if it ever gets re-released again, but at the moment, all I can do is guess based on memory, and I think Cyber-era B is a little bit bigger. Not much, but a bit. I think. Anyway, yeah, BTT-01 is larger than I initially expected, but not obnoxiously so. He can fit on a shelf without much problem, and he looks really good doing it. Alright, I've taken off the accessories for the sake of the transformation. Also, if anyone is curious, the guns are not blast effect compatible. The pegs, or the holes on the inside here, are just too small. They're not 5mm. So, can't use blast effects. Now, before we turn this into a car, which, to reiterate, yes, you absolutely can, just going to re-plug the Patreon and Ko-fi. Links to both at the end of the video, as well as down in the description. Support would be, of course, much appreciated, but is not necessary, and if you want to support the channel in other ways, you could always do the typical YouTube thing of like, comment, share, subscribe. Okay. Hopefully this will not be a complete mess. The transformation on this thing is actually not bad, it's just, there's a lot to it. So to start, we're just going to shift these wheels out of the way and close up the little door wings. And these will shift back. They're on these these double hinges up here. So this just shifts back. It's very stiff, but it shifts back. And it will go out more eventually, but for now I'm just going to leave it kind of like this. And then can rotate the doors down so that they're in a relatively proper alignment for when we get to vehicle mode. And then these little panels here fold out. And that is it for the doors for now. And now I'm going to rotate these little panels up here and then take the chess pieces and double hinge them out. And they do line up, they come out and line up with these pieces here. Just shift and swing until everything is lined up. Okay, I like to get the hip skirts out of the way just for a second because it just makes it easier to reach under here, because you want to take these little yellow pieces here actually flip out. And with those flipped out, you can use those as leverage to pull this down. It doesn't tab in super securely, but it doesn't need to. But this whole thing flips down. Oh, I think I need to disconnect this. Okay, so we're going to untab the back panel. And then this piece here is two separate hinged pieces that will all come up, swing up like this, and this becomes the hood of the car, obviously, and that just like straightens out, and we'll just kind of sit like that. Now we should be able to raise this up a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so we raise this up, and then this piece swings out, and these little bits here will rotate around to become the front bumper. They were just tucked into the torso before. And then this comes up the rest of the way, and we'll tuck in here. Come on. I've done this a couple of times now. This shouldn't be fighting me. All right, let's try doing this. Bring this in, and then swing this back in. There we go. And just make sure that these pieces stay aligned, roughly. This will shift back. It's on a double hinge, so you want to shift this back and down as far as it can go, because we're going to need to get this out of the way in a second. But for now, this will swing up and around, and it should go up. There we go. So that goes up, and then this all tabs together up here. And this actually swings up on a separate hinge. This little piece here, it's a separate hinge, so this will swing up a little bit just to be properly aligned. The oddly trickiest part for me is getting this separated. You kind of have to pull the lower body forward a bit and shift things up, because you need these lights to clear this hinge here. But you can do that and bring this up. I rotated these too soon. These are actually going to shift back down because we want to rotate the windshield piece around, and the best way I've found to do that is to rotate this piece down and then try and fold these out, because these little bars get hung up a little bit, so you kind of want to force them up past that. And it's a little awkward, but it's really not that bad. And these are like flexy but very stiff plastic, so I don't think it's in any danger of breaking. And then with that done, these can shift back up. And this will just kind of stay flared out. It's going to come back down later, but for now, it's just going to stay flared up like this. And while we're here, we can take this back panel and flip these little light pieces around and bring these pieces down. This is going to be fun when we get to the car mode, but we'll get to that. For now, this whole thing will rotate back. This will rotate, the arms kind of rotate in and around, as you probably would expect them to do. And I forgot to do this, so I'm going to do this now. This piece here actually folds in and around the center there, just that it kind of gets out of the way. So again, this rotates in and around. These detail pieces here rotate in, and for some reason on this side it's gets caught a little bit, and this one is fine, but let's rotate in like that. And now we can work on this section. And this section, I think, gives a lot of people trouble, and it is finicky, but it's not too bad. Because what's going on here is it's this double hinge system here. You need to swing this around and get this around, but the way to do it is kind of weird and tricky. Also, there's this little tiny piece here you want to unfold completely to become part of the wheel well. Now, the way I find it seems to work for me is to, with these, this is why I kept these pieces back here, because it gives you more room to bring down that wheel, because you can do that, and that gives you a little bit more room to swing this forward. And with that swung into place, now what we can do is you want to actually overcompensate. You want to bring this down a little bit further so that you can actually have it kind of going up like this, because then you want to bring the wheel in, then bring this back down, and because you want this little piece going around the armature for the wheel. So now this goes in and tabs in up here, and there is a tab here, which is, it's hard to see, but basically you can see the slot here. There's a tab on the inside of this piece that pegs into that spot, and it's very solid. So you want to actually use a fair bit of force, and it will actually kind of snap into place. And that gets that in place, and then you can use this little tab in here that'll tab into, again, I'll show it on here, there's like this little slot on the metal strut, and this tab on the inside of the wheel. You bring that in, and pinch it in, and it should peg into, peg into there pretty solidly. And once all of that is together, now we can take this piece and dual hinge it up and shift it forward until it goes over this tab here. And that will give us the front portion of the car all in there. I'm going to do the other arm off camera. There we go. All right, I'm going to shift the hip skirts back up because those don't need to be down anymore. And now for the legs. And the legs are also, involved, but not bad. And I also want to say I'm genuinely shocked. I popped off, I forget which one it was, but one of these black pieces on like the door trim, I popped it off when I first started transforming this thing, and it would not stay on. And it's surprisingly been staying on for the whole transformation. I did not expect that. But anyway, now that we've got this happening, we can work on the legs. So for the legs, I'm going to take the wheel and hinge it up. This hinge up here was sticky when I first got the figure out of the box, so it is a little bit like, feels like you're pushing things too far, but it will go. And this piece, I believe, is metal, like this little piece here, so it should be safe. But bring that up. You also want to take this panel back here and pop that up. The foot will untab from here, so this little back piece untabs, and then all of this will actually, no, before we do that, you want to untab this piece on the inside here. This just untabs here because it's plugged into the side. Now we can double hinge all this down. And something also worth noting with this, when you straighten this out, first of all, when you straighten this out, you don't want to do it like this, because then these corners will catch on each other. You want to go around using the rounded edge first, then straighten it out like that. The other thing to mention is this piece loves to pop off because it's not supposed to bend up or down very much. There's very little, it wiggles a little bit, but it's not really intended to move too far. So one of these was popped off in the box, and then it was popping off when I was trying to transform it. Just try not to bend this too much. It's not going to break. It's not pinned or anything like that. It's just, I think it's like designed to pop off in case you bend it too far, but it's just, if you don't want to pop it off, just try not to bend it. But what you do want to bend is this inner hinge here for the heel piece. This will bend in like that, and then this just kind of sits like that. Now, going to, well, first of all, bring the legs out of it so we've got more room to work. This will rotate to the side because that will give us more clearance for this. Because now we want to take this piece, and this will pull up and around this little black bar rotates out, and now this whole assembly will start to rotate down, and this also kind of will eventually line up like that. But before we do that, we actually want to bring this down a little bit so that we can take this panel and bring this in, and this will actually go around beyond this thing. So you kind of want to keep this up a little bit so that you can rotate this just a little bit past 90 degrees so that this piece can come in. And with that done, now this can straighten out. Take the foot, and this is a little awkward, but not too bad. Imagine if this thing was bigger. This slides up at an angle, so it just kind of slides up and in. And then this whole thing is designed to collapse. What's happening is this joint is collapsing in on itself like this. And with that collapsed in, now the foot can rotate around and sit in here. And now we're going to bring this down. So this can come down, and as this comes down, this will rotate. And this keeps coming down, this keeps rotating, and you kind of want to use this bit to rotate up and then rotate this down so that it's more in line with how the curve of the trunk goes, because as this comes down, this will tab in here. But what you really need to do more than anything is there's this little tab on the inside of the bar that will go into a slot back here, and it can be weirdly tricky to line up because of the way that the back end is shaped. But once you get that tab in place, it's so much easier to get the rest of this lined up. This comes down, and this little tab, just keep it zoomed in, this little tab here will go into this little slot here. So we rotate that down and plug this in. Plug in, I know you can, there you go. Okay, that'll plug in. Whoop, something shifted. Okay, I guess we'll do this first. Now, this is a thing that was not clear in any of the videos that I watched, so I want to try and make this super clear. This piece folds down, and this tab here will plug into this slot here. It requires a fair bit of force, and you want to hear a snap. So this comes in, and you kind of need to pull up just a little bit so that it clears this corner, but this can come in, come on. There we go. This comes in, make sure that's pegged in, and then just what I do is I kind of push this down, brace with this finger, and squeeze this in. And it will snap into place. And then the wheel can come in and also snap into place. And then finally, this piece rotates around. This little circular bit here will go over this peg here. So this kind of rotates in because you want to get it around this piece. This rotates in and then shifts and pegs in, and then this sits up like that. And that is one leg done. Gonna do the other one off camera again. Now, going to bring the legs together, and they will tab together. And we'll all peg together. The roof here, there's this square bit here that tabs in over this, and this is gonna be the toughest part of the whole thing. Not this, but the part that's coming up. I'm not. I always have trouble with this bit, and it's going to be fun. So this pegs in like that. This will come in, and you've got two little tabs here, two little slots here. So this all kind of swings in and pegs together. And that will give us most of the body of a car. The hardest part of this is the doors, because this needs to tab in to this bit here, but there are these two little pegs that need to tab in up here as well, and this piece is a flap. So this sucks. This is my least favorite part of the transformation, and really there's nothing that I dislike about the transformation except this part, because you have to get all this lined up and tabbed in. but you also need to make sure this bit is lined up here, and it is such a pain, which really stinks because so much of the rest of the transformation is completely fine, but it's just this part. See, I got that tabbed in, but now I've got to get these tabbed in, and this is just so unreasonably difficult to do. Come on. Come on. Plug in. Okay, we'll try this door. Don't you dare. Come on. Come on. Okay. Okay, we've got one side done. One side. Okay, we're in business. Now, for one final thing, the arms just come down and they kind of tab in. There's like these little, it's going to be hard to see, but there are these little black tabs in there that go into these little slots on the undersides of the arms. It's not like a super solid connection, it just sort of plugs in, but it gets the job done, I guess. It keeps the arms from moving around too much. Lastly, these bits just fold in. And there we go. There is BTT-01 in car mode, and it's just the doors. Everything else on this, aside from like these bits popping off, but that's, I could just glue those. Everything else with the transformation on this thing is completely fine. I don't mind doing it at all. If anything, I'd argue I think it's pretty cool. I'd say it's like not much more complex than, say, the movie masterpiece. It's just getting those doors into place. I mean, going from vehicle mode to robot mode is way easier, but I opted to do robot to vehicle because it comes in robot mode, and I understand that if someone's watching a video on this thing for the first time, then it probably would be more useful to see, going to this mode. What irritates me so much about this transformation is that it's not actually all that difficult or complicated on paper. Heck, in practice, it's like 90% fine. Where things become a little less fine is when I'm dealing with a couple of pieces that seemingly weren't glued in properly and getting those darn doors pegged in. Again, on paper it's very simple, but there's so little margin for error and there are so many little elements that need to line up just right that I end up spending most of my time on that one final step, as you saw. I'd love to know if there's an approach or technique I'm missing that makes it effortless, but I don't like that part. I had a little bit of luck this time around trying to angle the doors a little bit, like using this rotational joint to just angle them in slightly to try and peg them in up here first, and then rotate them down and in down here. That might be how I do it going forward. That is kind of obnoxious, but like the rest of it is actually fine and clever and even, I'd say, good. Now, as someone who tends to value the transformation in robot mode the most in a Transformers toy, I don't think I can say this alt mode is entirely worth the effort to get here. At least not with the headache that is lining up those doors. That said, I do think this looks pretty dang great as far as Rise of the Beasts Bumblebee car modes go. Any number of folks who care more about and pay more attention to cars can probably spot a ton of things that are wrong about this, but I think it's nice, considering the fact that it transforms into that robot mode. Sure, it's got a lot of obvious panels and seams, but again, think about what this has to do. Heck, as much as I really like that Cyber-era Bumblebee, or really the original Transcraft design, that transformation is even more involved and results in a car that's way more compromised than this. It has, like, hinges on the outside. It's very unsightly in a few places. I really like how they handled the detailing, too. Aside from the obvious black and yellow in things like the windows and stripes going along the top, the car also has plenty of small painted details all over, like the headlights, the bumper that's behind the black bars. Like if we move this out of the way, you can see it's actually painted black and silver back there. Got red taillights, silver floodlights up top, silver rims, though arguably they are black in the movie. And you get even more silver in the bars that are covering the front fender. But more than that, I just want to appreciate the wheel wells. I know that's weird, but hear me out. Not only did they painted the edges of the wheel wells black, like going up along here and here. And these are separate pieces. Also, I'm noticing something, I always miss this. You want to be careful when you're getting these pushed in that the door lines up with that little piece. Otherwise, you're going to have to use a spudger to try and force it into place after the fact, or just de-transform the whole thing and do it. So yeah, not only did they paint the edges of the wheel wells, which it is movie accurate, but I just like it because it helps them stand out on the yellow body, but they also made sure that the bits you see inside the wheel wells behind the tires are also black. For the rear wheels, this is just a molded part, which is fine on its own, but, you know, it's a molded part that's black, and it just kind of helps to keep things looking fairly cohesive and not super messy in there. But for the front wheels, this is actually a bunch of transformation hinges and stuff, and that's really cool. Maybe I'm just being a nerd for engineering, which, guilty, but I love that detail. I feel like with other figures we'd have gotten yellow in there instead, or a mixture of yellow and black, which would make the wheel wells stand out in a bad way. Here, they blend in to the point where I probably sound ridiculous even talking about them for so long, but I'd argue that that only proves my point. They didn't have to put in the effort, but they did, and that's admirable. What kind of surprised me when I first started messing around with this guy is the fact that you can actually store all of the accessories in this mode. And I do mean all of them. Each gun and knife can peg together using the gun's inner tab for the robot mode, and the peg hole in the knife that's closest to the tip. So, this one. And they just peg together like that. It holds pretty snugly, too. Then once you reduce the 4 weapons to 2 weapon clumps, you just use these little semicircular tabs on each gun to peg into these slots on the side of the car, close to where the door hinges are, right here. So you just peg in like this. Now, yes, this does look a bit silly, but given the size of the car relative to the weapons, the placement, and the way the lines of the knives run parallel to the doors, it almost looks intentional. Not like something you'd expect to see on a regular car, just more like this is how B's guns would pop out for a vehicular attack mode. If nothing else, I think this looks way better, or at least not as bad as a lot of weapon storage other Bumblebee figures have gotten lately. I didn't forget about the battle mask either. There's actually plenty of room in there to plug it on like you would in robot mode. You don't have to do anything special, just reach in and attach it like before. And it stays in place. You can technically even leave it on during transformation, but I didn't bother because it could still potentially pop off, and I didn't want to deal with that on top of worrying about that obnoxious door detail piece. It's on there. It's just stored. All of his gear is now stored in vehicle mode. I love that he can hold everything in car mode, and while they aren't hidden, they do manage to look less ridiculous than with other vehicles. Just like the robot, the car is rather big. Not what I'd consider too big, and not even bigger than I'd have liked, but big. He's practically gigantic next to the usual modern Deluxes and Voyagers, but he might be roughly in the same size area as a typical leader. He's certainly heavier than one. Really, this is closer in size to those big gimmick toys, or toys where the gimmick is that they're big. Like Beast Mode Bumblebee. But again, way heavier and more dense. Granted, none of this ultimately matters to me very much because he's going to be displayed in robot mode, but I can appreciate a big B. Imperfect though this figure may be, and it's definitely imperfect, I actually like it a lot. As much, if not more, than the Cyber-era B I used to have. Truth be told, I've been waiting to get a Rise of the Beasts Bumblebee for a while. One that isn't the Beast Mode figure, I mean. Studio Series 100 was in my sights for a bit, but then the reissue sold out and the aftermarket prices were right back up to no thank you levels. Then this thing came along, with its somewhat annoyingly limited articulation and frustrating transformation capstone. And yet, I don't care. I don't care about the imperfections, whether they're design quirks or QC flubs. I just care about finally having a Rise of the Beasts Bumblebee figure that transforms and looks awesome, which is exactly what this is and does. Now I just need to reacquire another Cyber-era B and I'm all set. Then I'll have a Bayverse MPM B, this thing, this, and a masterpiece-ish Bumblebee. Why do I suddenly have so many Bs? Anyway, that's enough about what I think. What do you all think of Brave Troops Toys BTT-01? Whatever your thoughts, feel free to chime in down below. I always enjoy hearing from you all. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back to say more words about toys at you next time.